Hey, Pastor Steve Waldron. I wanted to bring something out of a book from Pure Words, Verlier 1602, Purified, and it is the Septuagint Legend. And I was reading it, and there was a lot of things in here I appreciated. Now, as you know, probably the first person I ever saw that said that the Septuagint, which was supposedly a Greek translation of the Old Testament, was falsified, was many years ago, and it was Peter Ruckman. And now Peter Ruckman, he had an IQ of 195. I have seen the letter where the founder of Bob Jones University said he was the smartest person to maybe ever come through Bob Jones University. So he also taught New Testament Greek for over 45 years at a college level. So there's a lot I disagreed with Peter Ruckman on. He was right on some things, especially biblical textual criticism for the most part. You probably find some errors, but the overall gist is right. And so, but then he referenced, I think his name was Paul Cale. And so I began to study Cale, and he was considered to be like a preeminent, maybe one of the preeminent Old Testament scholars of the 20th century, at least part of the 20th century. And I was like, so this guy, and he had the same doubts about the Septuagint. So I began to do some study, and I've since read some books, primarily, there's several, but David Daniels' books have done the most in convincing me. Now the thing, and he's got videos, he's getting many tens of thousands of views on a regular basis on videos. He took over Chick Tract Publications after Jack Chick passed away at the age of 90, 91. I think I did a memorial for him. The New York Times did a huge thing for Jack Chick, because whenever you've distributed 900 million pieces of literature in several different languages, and you know, I've been out to Chick Publications and that type of thing, and got an interview, I think, with Jack Chick on CD. A lot of different things. And then there's the Chick Tract Society. A lot of people don't like Jack Chick's theology because he's very fundamentalist and really anti-Catholic, but they loved his comic books. My brother, who's a comic book artist and writer and used to run the Atlanta Comics Fantasy Fair, he's written for Speed Racer, Scrooge McDuck, and done his own comic books and all kinds of things. Lamar Waldron written a lot of books. Been interviewed by Conversations with the Great Minds and this type of thing. But, you know, he wanted it. He was like, these are phenomenal. They're incredibly illustrated, and they really are. And it was a good thing, too, like for relations between people or groups, because like the two guys usually that were the soul winners, you had a white guy and a black guy, and they were going together to win souls and all that. I always thought that was a good thing, because true Christians obviously are not racist in any sense of the form. And so David Daniels, the thing that infuriates me about his books is like the first 40 pages or so, you're like, yeah, this is not true, because he just doesn't get anywhere. And then he starts dropping like neutron bombs. And it's like, why didn't you kind of start? Why didn't you do this in the first 10 pages? Because there's no telling how many people read the first 30 or 40 pages and say there's nothing to this. But he has irrefutable proof that, I mean, it's irrefutable, that basically the Septuagint by and large was back written when certain people in certain branches of false Christianity in maybe the 3rd century began to see, hey, the apostles and Jesus were quoting the Old Testament, but they were using a Targum method. They weren't quoting it verbatim, and so we had better write something that aligns with what they wrote. And that's the reason you only find just scraps of the Old Testament ever written in Greek. So David Daniels, he's written books on, very good books, done videos. So the Septuagint, the 70 Legend by Pastor Silvestre Vasquez. Please forgive me if I mispronounce his name. And so probably for 25 years after graduating Bible school and graduating, getting a doctorate in theology, I believed this. There is a complete translation of the Old Testament in Greek before the time of Christ, that this translation was used by Jesus and the apostles, and since the translation contains the Apocrypha, Jesus and the apostles maybe even tacitly approved of the Apocrypha. So especially points 1 and 2 there, that was just, and that's what almost everybody believes in the field of scholarship. So when something, I'm a highly skeptical person, and so I'm just like, go everywhere praying, lifting up holy hands without wrath and doubting. So men's issues are wrath and doubting. We're soon angry and we doubt things, and it's good to have a healthy skepticism. But I'm just like, this is crazy. Like the first time I'm like, yeah. So, but the more I studied it over the years, I'm like, wow. I'm buying like the Septuagint by Rolfs, I think it was. I'm getting the Septuagint in different things. I'm getting Vaticanus where I can read it. I'm getting Sinaiticus where I can read it. I'm studying Greek. I'm just studying Hebrew, and I'm just like, okay, what? And so it's just over the course of time, it's just like, this is for real. This really doesn't exist. So let's look at just some bullet points he gives here. From the time of Jeremiah, God swore by his great name that his name would not be invoked in all the land of Egypt by any Jew, Jeremiah 44:25. So people like Philo of Alexandria, or some of the other things in Egypt, the Jewish communities. Okay, so God gave the Jews the privilege of keeping his word, not the Egyptians, Romans 3:1 and 2, and that's true. The complete legend of the LXX is based on the letter of Aristes. And now that's a real, like when I'm discussing people, like friends of mine, they're attacking me. You don't believe in the Septuagint? You're an idiot. Let's call the sanitarium in Milledgeville, Georgia, and have you locked up. It's straitjacket time. And I'm like, well, do you know where the legend came from? Well, most don't, but sometimes they'll say, yeah, the letter of Aristes. So I'm like, have you ever read the letter of Aristes? Well, no, I haven't. Well, you need to read the letter of Aristes, because it is obvious that this is apocrypha, that this is pseudepigraphal, that this is things that didn't occur. These things did not exist. And, it's a legend. It's nothing, it's not some historical document that, some Herodotus or somebody, Pliny the Elder, is writing in the ancient world, Livy's history. This is totally spurious and legendary, okay? So there's only one mention of the Pentateuch being translated into Greek under Ptolemy, and this is from Eusebius, who Eusebius is writing in the 4th century AD, citing Aristobulus, and the passage is dubious even there. Now notice Pentateuch. So now this has been a dramatic shift in my discussions and disputations with friends of mine many times. Is they used to say Greek Old Testament. Well, now they've begun doing some study, and they're saying, oh, the Pentateuch. Oh, so now out of 39 books, you're saying 34 books were not translated, only the first 5 books were translated. So they've made monumental shifts in themselves. And so I find that fascinating many times, not all the time. But they're like, you can't say there wasn't a Greek Pentateuch before, because I've done videos listing the different pre-Christian era scraps of the Septuagint. I've tried to give every Greek in these videos, every Greek scrap that there is, and there's almost none, and they're basically from the Pentateuch, a lot from Leviticus, if I remember correctly. It's been several months since I did that video. Okay, we do multiple videos. So, Philo of Alexandria, 20 to 50 AD, a Jewish Gnostic who denied the Bible, mentions the translation and implies that the translators were inspired. Now, Daniels, he comes up, he thinks that Philo may have been the original translator of at least the Pentateuch. I think Bill Cooper goes into this as well. And if you ever want someone to get to the heart of the matter, Bill Cooper from the creation science movement in the UK is one of the great scholars of our day. And you say, well, he doesn't have a PhD from Yale. Like I said, he's one of the great scholars of our day. He's not someone who is credentialed per se. He does the legwork. Okay, not saying that those folks don't do the legwork. Sometimes they do. The writer of the letter of Aristees was not to be who he pretended to be, a courier at the court of Ptolemy II, but he was a Jew and he worshiped Greek philosophy, not the God of the Old Testament. Professor Kale said that there was no such thing as a pre-Christian LXX. Now notice, see, that was, even when I was in Bible school studying this, that was always this big discrepancy, because they supposedly, the Pharaoh Ptolemy, Philadelphia, said, I want you to get 6 scribes from all 12 tribes to do this. So that's 72, but they called it the 70. And so I'm like, so is it 72 or 70? Why is it called? And so none of my professors, they were like, we don't know why it was called the 70. Just one of those anomalies of history. So even that to me was real fishy. But you know, when you get into the story and they all got into these chambers and they all came out and it all was exactly just alike. And forget that the Levites were the ones that were supposed to have the couriership of the God of the Old Testament, not all 12 tribes, just the tribe of Levi. Even though people not in the tribe of Levi wrote it, but I'm talking about the copying of it. All right. So some other things, he's got some questions. According to the letter of Aristees, there were 6 chosen elders of each tribe. Why 6? Do we read of 70 elders of Israel? Were they 70 or 72? How did Aristees devise 12 tribes? Only the Lord knew where the 12 tribes were in 250 BC. There was not a priest in Jerusalem in 200 BC that could find the genealogy of the 10 lost tribes. To me, that's kind of weak, because I do know the Jews really took great care with their genealogies, see the genealogy of Jesus, and they would have had the genealogies at the temple. Okay, to this day, no scholar has ever produced a Greek copy of the Old Testament written before 300 AD, and that is true. And it goes into the fairy tale. One thing I liked about what he wrote in here too is he actually gives Josephus his comments, because Josephus talked about the Septuagint as well. And but even he was about this is Josephus writing that he was also amazed by the way they were written, because they were made of gold letters on leathers. These leathers were united so perfectly that one could not say where a membrane ended and where the next one began. So and so all of that's kind of spurious and apocryphal. So this is a good little thing, the Septuagint Legend by Pastor Silvestre Vasquez. You might want to read it. It's very short. It's only a few pages in here, as we've shown you already. And but just study it for yourself. Pray about it, because I think you'll find that the Septuagint Legend by the letter of Aristees is just that. It is a legend. It is not true. So we love you. God bless. Let's live for God in truth in Jesus' name till he comes again. We love you in Jesus' name.